Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dark Rhino Security, Security Confidential. I'm your host, Manoj Tandon, and today we are honored to have Hans Vargas Silva join us. Hans is a graduate of Purdue University with a master's in information security. He has a lot of experience in the field of cybersecurity. That's actually an understatement. He has worked at organizations like Sallie Mae and Marathon Petroleum as a cybersecurity architect and is currently with Marathon in the cybersecurity, GRC, and IT compliance space. Hans is passionate about giving back to the community with volunteering, and we're going to get a chance to hear his thoughts on that. Welcome to the show, Hans. Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon.
Thank you for the invitation, Manoj.
Appreciate you being here. So I guess, a great place to start, you're from Peru. And when we think of Peru, cybersecurity is not the first item that comes to mind. How did you get into cybersecurity? What was that journey? How did that go?
Wow. I must say that I'm very fortunate and very blessed in some ways to be where I am. And wouldn't be my wildest dreams when you ask me what are you going to do in your life after high school. I wouldn't have said this. I knew I liked computers, and I was a lab brat for a while, where I didn't own a computer. My parents couldn't afford it for the longest time. And actually, even when I was in college, I didn't own one until my last year of college. And but I was in the lab, volunteering my time to reformat computers, Anyway, so yes, I'm from Peru, South America. I'm from this jungle side of Peru, and I went to school to do a systems engineering degree, a bachelor's, and through a series of fortunate events, I met my wife in Peru when she was visiting and teaching in a local school, and that's how we got um, we got to get married and moved to the U.S. And through a series of jobs in the U.S., many of them which were not initially IT, I found my way back to IT, and I found an opportunity to be awarded a scholarship for service through Purdue University.
Excellent.
Serious. So through the service, I went to school for my master's in 2 years, and I gave back time, 2 years working for the state of Indiana, and that was a great experience. I was able to put a lot of the things I learned in practice. My 2 years were up, and I was necessarily in a rush to leave, but I got an offer to join the financial services as a cybersecurity architect, which was a great opportunity. And again, almost a year into, I was offered to join Marathon, another great opportunity. And I've been here for the last almost 4 years. And I started as a cybersecurity architect and moved it to an opportunity in the governance, risk, and compliance. And that's what I've been learning a lot during these last 2 years. So that's my journey.
That's quite a story there, and I'm sure you're giving us the abridged version. There's probably a lot of very interesting details in there that could make for certainly at least a couple chapters in a book.
Probably, yes.
Right. So you have, one thing I noticed about you is that you have degrees and certificates from great schools, Purdue, MIT, Harvard. How do you think that education shaped your career? Has that had a huge play in it?
The desire to learn, I guess, it's always been there, and it's always been an expectation from my parents. I am first everything, first graduate from high school from my family. Um, in terms of my parents, at least, my mom got, I guess, I had me very young with my dad. She was 17. She couldn't finish high school, and so she's always put that into our minds. Like, look what we couldn't do. I mean, she eventually finished night school, but she said there are opportunities I don't have now, not because I regret having you. It's just because this is what happened to our lives, and the opportunities that she didn't have to go to school, and the means perhaps from her family, right? So they always had that look at our example, do something better, and we're going to try to give you the best that we can education wise. and the means were not necessarily there. I am the first of three children, and for example, for the longest time, I was the only one going to school that my parents could afford sending me to school while my other brothers had to work and wait. And I finished. I was able to help them to finish their careers, and we're in a better place now. The opportunities that I've been taking advantage. I guess I'm seeking those opportunities to learn something new,
Yeah.
to get exposed to new knowledge, and I guess how to apply it is also. And perhaps we're going to talk more about giving back, which is part of, I guess, my DNA in some ways. Because I've received so much, I want to do something for somebody else, and if that means sharing, mentoring, or being part of these type of conversations, I'm very glad to be part of it.
So, if there is someone listening in Peru right now that is of lesser means or lesser opportunity than what you were, and they want to get into cybersecurity, what would you suggest for them? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I think one of those things that I was told once before, and it's very true, is somebody cannot take away something you learn.
That's very true.
And if you do something greater with what you learn, you're going to grow. And is that through a small business? Is it through a school? Yeah. I believe there is at least in Peru, it's true. This education it's as a mechanism to get out of poverty. And so you see a lot of people excelling in math and trying to get to a school. If you cannot afford a private school, you have to apply to a public school. So it takes sometimes 3 years to get in because it's free, but only the best can make it. And so I guess my advice would be to have a goal and then understand what you really want to do and then pursue it. It might take you longer than it has been in my case. I mean, I'm not a youngster, and in my life it has taken a while to get where I am. But it's always to be optimistic of the future, and that's something I can relate to. And the U.S. is the perfect place to be and to take advantage of those opportunities. But in Peru itself, a growing economy, at least prior to COVID, I should say. Um, and we've been in worse situations, so I think the future is could be brighter.
And we see the same thing. I've spent some time over in India. In that society as well, education is primarily viewed as a way to get out of poverty. Now, same kinds of situation. But the one thing is there that if there is a child who has a sense of wonder and is absolutely hell bent on pursuing it, somehow a lot of those opportunities open up for them. And I've always said, if you're in an unfortunate predicament, but you have that sense of wonder, as long as you hold on to that and push through, success will come. It has to, because
Attitude is also
eh,
important, and also the sense of work ethic. People see that, and people notice that. Yes, there could be somebody who's very charismatic and can make its way through life, but usually hard work pays off, and at least that's my experience.
absolutely. So let's switch over to a little bit more of a serious topic. Critical infrastructure. And while we were talking about this, you had actually brought up a Netflix episode. So, you know, why don't you tell the story? And
Well, let me preface it saying I'm not necessarily advocating for Netflix. They're not paying me or sponsoring me, so this is just my personal comment. There is a series called
yep.
Spycraft, and I was interested. Actually, the last episode, they do a quick interview. I think it's like minute 30 of the documentary. His name is James Gosler. He's a retired CIA officer,
Okay.
and he makes an assessment. He just says like it's not a big deal, and he says a lot of the questions I get is how worse is gonna get, and he says, I'm gonna quote him. Um, I use the words catastrophic and existential related to the loss of everything: electricity, computer power, etc. There are no communication, the cars are not working, the power, no power to the houses, refrigeration is not working. So he says that most people can survive a day or two, maybe a week without supplies at home. But once you start getting to weeks, um, it's going to be difficult. Just think about water and electricity. Very little likelihood that this would happen, but low likelihood with catastrophic impact. That's worth thinking about, he says. So I highly recommend that everybody do that. Think about it. And he says it in a tone like it's not a big deal, It's not like the sense of urgency. He just says it like, think about it. And I had to listen to that 3 times. And how I think in my mind, or what as I relate to critical infrastructure is, it is absolutely true. The U.S. is very depending. Our way of life is depending on gas, electricity, and water. Being readily available. Being in
Absolutely.
India, me from Peru, blackouts, water shortages are not necessarily um, unheard
Right.
of. So people prepare, gallons of water, maybe a tank of
Yep.
water somewhere in the ground or above. Um, Electricity, well, candles,
Yeah.
yeah, or something,
Right.
some other type of means to illuminate your home. And people, I don't know, have a way to preserve food, like, I don't know, smoking them or
Sure.
salt,
And they eat a lot of
that your
fresh food
refrigerator is not going
too.
to go to waste,
They
right?
eat a lot of
Yeah,
fresh. So
you have a chicken running
right,
around.
exactly. So that you don't
Uh,
need refrigeration.
but I am speaking as a person who's been in the U.S. for so long, and then if this would happen, and we see it potentially happening, we've seen threat actors testing, trying to poison water supply, just by altering the chemistry or the
There
flow of
was an attempt in
chlorine and all
Florida
that.
recently to do that. That exact thing.
So it could potentially happen in our home. I mean, to our communities, the small critical infrastructure is privately owned, and they are not necessarily cyber protected. That was one of the things that I was working in the state of Indiana before coming here. There is a certain urgency, but there is no funding, or there is not necessarily the incentives, right, or the mandate from the government to do something about it with private entities. In this case, most owned critical infrastructure is private, right?
Right.
So it's not until something catastrophic happens that we're going to realize that we are highly dependent on those things.
But it shouldn't take a catastrophic incident. And if you remember, way back in the 1800s, there was a solar event that had sent a surge through all the telegraph lines now in the United States and had caused major issues. If that same event took place today, it would likely severely damage the grid. And we would have,
Just think
yeah,
about
exactly what you're talking about, right?
just think about not make it a cyber attack, but think about it as as a fluke on the cloud services. Just think of that. We depend so much in our communication, our email, everything is moving to the cloud. And if we have an interruption, if it just my local provider of internet provider will just, you know, had an issue, I lost productivity, I cannot connect to my company, I'm working from home, so what do we do? You know,
You
it's going to be affecting our business, our employers, our way of life in some ways. We depend on. We don't write letters anymore.
That's right.
We just expect to dial a number and get a video call. I don't think I remember phone numbers anymore.
I don't think any of us
To be
do.
honest with
Do
you.
you even have a phone diary with everyone's phone number in it anymore? It's probably in your
Well,
phone.
it speaks. Well, think about incident response, right? You're supposed to be having that in your teams. What happens if you cannot depend on your systems? But I guess what I'm trying to say is our critical infrastructure is fragile. I'm not an expert, but I can see how the impact could be catastrophic in some ways.
Ted Koppel actually wrote a book on this topic, a book titled "Lights Out." So, if the listeners out there want to take a quick peek into that, I would highly recommend taking a look at that. I'd also recommend another book, the title of which is "The Perfect Weapon." These are all great reads, and Ted Koppel, a very credible journalist, talks extensively about if the lights go out, what's going to happen. And if you think about major cities like New York, where people are living in high rises, or Chicago, one of the biggest problems going to happen is sanitation, because they're not going to get water. You're not going to have water being able to be pumped up and people to live and depend on the way things are. And as we have seen with what the Russians did with the Ukraine, there is a vulnerability, right? And I think maybe the only deterrence that still is that we would consider it an act of war. I mean, if somebody shut down the grid, that is an act of
Yeah,
war. But sure, you can respond, but it doesn't do anything to help the people who would.
yeah. I've been here. That's more a conversation in the kind of a military round, I
Yeah,
guess. Um, but the ability of what is enough, right? We know some actors have been, I don't know, still in PI, no IP,
yeah,
intellectual
yeah.
property, and they are monitoring somebody's network, and but disrupting that is going to be very aggressive. Uh, and so, what's the response from a country perspective, right? And we've seen examples, and I don't think the U.S. has done anything about it. But also, the U.S. has been infiltrating all somebody else's
That's right.
networks, and doing the exact same probably. So it's a hard problem to, or a very hard subject to argue. You can argue in both ends of the spectrum.
Exactly, but I think that this is a weapon that's likely to get used, because cyber weapons, they don't require you to have tanks and submarines and all this military
Yeah,
infrastructure. You can cause a great deal of damage by being a small, intelligent country that has some reason or axe to grind with someone, right? It's asymmetrical warfare at its best.
asymmetrical. Yeah,
At its best.
yeah, and that's very true. And with readily available tools now in the darknet and the exposure from some of these tools from the
Yeah.
NSA, pretty much label field. I mean, you have leveled the field of access to these highly sort of sophisticated tools, and the weaponization of those have been very interesting to see in the last 10 years.
Well, I mean, if you look at petroleum, not to pick on you, but I think Saudi Aramco got hit by the Trisus worm, and that nearly shut them down. And that was an attack on the safety and control systems in a refinery. So you would think that if Saudi Aramco is vulnerable to that, probably a lot of other folks are as well. That's
Yeah, we've seen also the effects that has taken on um, companies that they're not necessarily the target, but then get affected, and then they cannot recover. Their means to restore has been compromised, and I forgot the name of the company, but it was a shipping company, and because they have a domain controller that was in Africa that happens to be disconnected from the internet, saved their lives because that was the only
it.
domain controller that was not infected, and they were able to recover their infrastructure based on
You
that.
know,
Do you
I
remember the
know.
company's name?
Yeah, I want to say there were two. If it's the same incident I'm thinking of, it was actually the Russian cyber attack on the Ukraine, and FedEx
Yes,
and Merck
Merck.
were
That's the one.
both innocent collateral damage in that.
Collateral
And
damage.
you know
Yes.
what happened in that case? I think that court case is actually still pending, because their cyber insurance policy came along. Their policy carrier said, "We're not paying it, because an act of war is excluded from the policy." And the fact that the Russians did this on Ukraine, that's an act of war. And you guys were collateral damage, well, tough. And
Well, some lawyer over there had, got a really good bonus for denying that claim,
well, they took him to
for
court.
sure.
That's right. So now
Right.
it's pending, and it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up, which brings us actually to government regulation, right?
Correct.
Right.
Well, there's so much that the government can regulate, and in some cases I agree with. There's some very outrageous mishandles of security controls or security in general or privacy, people's information. And I think the government's role is to say something about it, to protect the, I guess, the consumer. or but in some areas also I find that the government is, and this is a criticism for our government here, is they're not necessarily doing a better job to show us the way.
That's right.
Um, Regulation sometimes could be very burdensome for companies. Just think about SOX and other type of regulations that states, countries enact, and the extents that companies have to go to comply with that is if you just were to quantify the amount of money and effort and resources spent, um, I wonder if sometimes it's not necessarily addressing the issue or the risk. Um, I don't know. Do you have other
No, you know
questions
what?
about
You know that
regulations?
I would agree with you. And if you look at what's happened even in our own federal government, our federal government has lost a lot of data. Like I think China took all
OPM?
the forms for security clearance out of the OMB. They had access to all of that, and I'm sure that those guys were supposed to be compliant with everything. You know, one thing you know about government bureaucracies is they love compliance and they love audits and frameworks. And
But compliance for the sake of compliance is just a low bar if you think about it. A compliance is you need to meet these minimum criteria. And then some people think that because I meet these criteria, I'm secure.
most people think
And
that. I'm so glad you said that. Most people think that. We have such a hard time convincing people that being compliant doesn't mean that you are secure. In fact, I think we've had 4 or 5 guests where I've brought that subject up with, because we do feel strongly about it. Compliance does not equal security.
yes, I will agree with that. And I'm in right now in the area of compliance, and yes, we are to comply. But if we do it just to meet a specific requirement and we don't see the context of the risk, if you're just compliant just because somebody told you need to be compliant with this, you know, article A dot B, um, and you don't have the context of how is this addressing risk? You might be leaving a big gap on the risk open just because you are too busy looking at the specific article or the specific section of a standard that you ought to be just check marking.
So, Hans, how do you get decision makers to see that compliance does not necessarily equal great cybersecurity?
That's a tough question because I will have to give our leaders the benefit of the doubt because there are so many priorities depending of the day of whoever is dictating the how we should we go. Some things could be in the back burner, and it doesn't mean that. And they're important, very important. But sometimes there's an initiative to do
Right.
this, and there's an initiative to do that, to focus on upgrading something or moving to a different system, or to you know. Often, sometimes we ignore um, culture, awareness of security in our organizations. We punish people sometimes for phishing, and we don't tell them why it's important for them to identify that something is suspicious. Um, we force people to start doing two-factor authentication, SAML, but we don't tell them why is it important. You know, um, we sometimes deploy technologies and solutions halfway to the capacity that they should be. And I'm not specifically saying anything about. It's just in my career I've seen
Oh,
that where you buy the top of the line product. Um, think about the Gartner quadrant,
yeah.
right? So you go and get the best of the best, but you implemented at 30%. Maybe you should have bought you know, the not so expensive, flashy product, and if you would use it to an 80%, that would be more effective.
That there are so many questions in all the things you just stated that I think we could easily take 2 more hours to talk about it. But I will just try and scratch the surface here with some of the things. So when you talk about risk, which you mentioned very appropriately, that sometimes, if it's not done in the context of risk, then what's the point? How do you communicate risk? What how do you frame it in the context of the business? Is there some tips and guidances for our listeners that you can provide that they could make the cybersecurity more tangible of a problem when stated in terms of risk?
I think there are many ways to do that. One of them could be understanding your data, right? What type of data are you handling? If you're handling, scheduling for product to be transported or to be transformed through your processes, um, would somebody disrupting that information, or instead of 20 it's 400, would that take an impact in your financials? Or so correlating always to money sometimes is a good way to, or quantify the loss of productivity. you know if I were to say, in my industry, if I were to lose email for a week, would that be equivalent to the risk of having my refinery shut down for a week? you know can I still invoice by hand, or communicate picking up the phone to call somebody saying, hey, here is almost like Telegram, right? I still am able to communicate, or just drive to my customer and have a meeting instead of, don't have email. I cannot talk to you. But if I'm not able to process my the product from A to B and take it to my customer, then that might be more. So the risk of, I guess, going back to risk, what is the risk? Is the data that I'm exposing going to affect my reputation, my ability to do business? So I think painting it on those terms to the business could could drive the point you're trying to make. Sometimes cybersecurity or compliance, we've seen us as a consuming resources, right? Budget, because we need to get this and
Right.
that and that. But it's not until I guess we need to frame it in a way that we can say we are supporting your business. Without these measures of protections or controls in place to address this risk, obviously we have to identify the risk first. Um, it's going to be We're not going to be the enablers of the business function. And IT is so integrated now on everything, from communications to processes. There's machinery that is connected to, SCADA systems, or sensors that are being connected to, pipelines, or think about it. Anything that you can manage now from your phone now, access or see. Um, those are things that IT and cybersecurity enables. So how do we securely um, give you access to an application that is connected to a SCADA system from your iPad?
I would say don't do it. That would be my advice. I would say
See,
I
there is a business case, right? The business is always going to want something, and sometimes cybersecurity's role is seen as saying no, but it has to be explained why not.
yeah, I mean, one thing, I don't know if I shared this with you prior to this. I was involved heavily in the chemicals business with a engineering conglomerate, and spent a lot of time in the oil and gas sector. So my my professional advice, if someone was to say that, I say don't do it. I'd I'd say some things should be air gapped, and they should really be
Right.
air gapped.
Not because you can, you should.
That's right. I'd say don't. Some things are not meant to be connected. Don't do it. Don't be lazy. Get up, walk to the control room, take a look at the needle, walk over to the piece of equipment, put an instrument on it, check it. Don't rely on web-based analytics, because as soon as I give someone the ability to extract data, these systems are so complex. There could be a gap in there that allows somebody to go the other way as well. And now you
Stocknex is a good
it's
example,
exactly
right? You were relying on what you're reading on your screen compared to something that is spinning faster. Um, yeah, we can go into much
oh
detail
yeah,
there,
but
but everybody
that's
understands
what
the
we,
idea there,
Hans, that's exactly what we did to the Iranians on their centrifuges, right?
right?
That was Operation Nitro Zeus. So so very interesting on that. But when you look at regulation, then regulators, I often think, um, I want to be careful because they are very, very good people, but I think oftentimes they don't have enough information, and it's a knee jerk reaction when regulations are being framed. And let me give you an example of where I'm coming from here. The SolarWinds hack recently that now everybody knows about, right? When you saw members of Congress talk about it, they were talking in terms of, well, we shouldn't allow unauthorized software or truly untested software to be put on government systems. And none of those statements are true. That software was authorized. SolarWinds, very well tested, highly reputable organization, right? It had nothing to do with that. And then if there's a knee jerk regulation that comes out of it that says thou shall not do XXX, it's going to be grossly ineffective in preventing.
Yeah, they might have a good. Uh, Many times that happens, right? You look at regulations, there are good intentions behind it, but then becomes a bill that is like 5 reams of paper
Yeah,
long, and nobody understands what it's supposed to be doing, and everybody interprets it differently, and at the end you don't get to the core of what you're trying to do. Uh, so regulation sometimes is burdensome. It sometimes is misinterpreted in terms of people who are building those type of regulations don't understand the context. So that may be an area where I've been very fortunate to be learning. Um, I'm interacting sometimes as compliance as part of the mediator between the business or IT and the auditor,
yeah,
internal or external auditor. And context is key because sometimes the more I understand what IT's function is or the business has done, the better I perhaps can have a conversation with the auditor saying, well, I think you did not understand. I know what your requirement to test or to give evidence is, but this evidence means this, and try to walk them through it. And something that could be an issue, it's not necessarily an issue. Yeah, there might be something that it was not necessarily all right there, but it's not necessarily a critical issue
that's right.
if we explain it right, the context. And there are other cases where it's clear that it was not well done and it has to be an issue. Um, um, I don't have much of the influence in terms of the what is going on in Congress. I should say that, but
But you have a lot of state experience, right? You worked with the
in
state of Indiana for a
yeah,
degree of time, which is why I'm very interested in this topic and here.
my interaction with the state of Indiana was more as part of my thesis and also developing in what we call the INISAC, which was the concept of the information sharing.
Right.
Just like we have MSISAC, which is federal to states. We have the best one, in my opinion, FSISAC, which is the Financial
Yep.
Services ISAC. The threat intelligence is shared across financial institutions across the world, and it's very dynamic and well developed. That there is not the IISAC was the attempt to have the state of Indiana sharing some curated and threat intelligence to throughout the state, through other local municipalities or businesses, local critical infrastructure to say here are the things you must be aware or maybe looking at. You have a small IT shop, maybe you should tune your firewall and think about it's growing this keeping or holding hostage educational institutions that are perhaps don't have the budget to protect themselves, and then you have HIPAA and PII information being ransom, until either they pay or they have to recover. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities that we see. Um, you would think, who would want to attack a hospital or a school? But it happens more often than
It
you
happens
think,
all the
or
time.
a police station, and they don't have insurance or they don't have coverage. They don't have the IT resources to recover. And so that was the idea in the project I work in the state of Indiana. It's still ongoing, by the way, and I hope it continues. But it brings me to, I guess, the information
Right.
sharing portion, right? We are mandated to share back to the federal government in many times, and we don't see the way back. So it's all get, and nothing to receive. Maybe I shouldn't say nothing, but we are not built to collaborate in some cases. there are not many incentives for us to collaborate. Financial services do because there is a financial incentive. I'm going to lose money. My
Yeah.
if my customers think that their money is not safe, I am going to lose reputation and eventually customers. So they build and they're very serious about it. Um, and that is not necessarily the case for all the ISACs.
And that's a very good point. And in is there something like you just mentioned one that the government should be sharing back, but are there other government policy positions or things that they should be doing or taking up to help the private sector? Is there that you would say, hey guys, if you're going to do anything in Congress or at the state level or the local level, think of it this way?
I don't know. That's a tough question. I guess I would say let me. Now, I'm not trying to be create controversy here, but deregulate sometimes. Make it easier to open a business. Make it easy to um, I don't know, consortiums. We don't have consortiums to acquire technology and security technology. We don't have, I mean, I've seen cases where small school corporations get together and say we're going to buy in bulk or we're going to acquire services to protect our network as a conglomerate. We don't see that much. Maybe competing hospitals can get together and say let's start sharing some of these things or best practices. It's because it's I don't know if you heard the concept. I think Google is using this, or even Microsoft is saying security is not. Let's not think about shared security because you use it our services, so we give us we have a shared fate in lack of security.
That's correct.
So it's almost like a fiduciary approach to security, which is very interesting. It's like if we are unsecure and you are, or if you unsecure or misconfigure our services, you are as unsecure as us. So the share fate type of mentality it's something new that I've started seeing, and like I said, almost like a fiduciary type of example, right? So if you think about fiduciary investing companies, look, they will not invest or they will not be investing in something that is or betting against your
Right.
investments on the side to make money. They will do what is right for them is right for you. The same for security. I haven't seen much of that. I don't know. I don't know if that could be regulated.
It
But
can be
one thing I
incentivized,
can say,
but
it could be incentivized. But how do you incentivize without regulation? That's a question. The government doesn't know how to do that. Unless you can point to a good example, I would love to learn.
yeah, now
There are
you're putting
some
me on the spot, so I got to
there are some there are some ways that we've seen that right through um, grants. Um, there have been some national labs have been doing a lot of good research and publishing it out for the for the benefit of the private sector. Universities have been doing something interesting, a little questionable, where they hold the patents of professors or ideas and within their, and they commercialize it, becomes something that the public can consume. Um, I don't know, attracting investment in technology. We see collaboration with other countries where cybersecurity is blooming and good ideas are happening. I don't know if there's enough research and development in colleges um,
not
to
yet.
go around. I think there is, but
But I think there's a lot of advancements that are being made there. I see the number of schools now that are offering an information security degree out of their computer science departments has gone up, and those institutions are actually engaging with the private sector to get opinions and shaping the curriculum, which is really very cool. I sit on the board of the computer science advisory board of the computer science department at Slippery Rock University, and they've been doing a lot of things in terms of shaping their cybersecurity program to match the evolving threat landscape and to have people coming out that are much more in tune with what's happening, and that's kind of cool.
that's That's great. That's great to hear. It's very encouraging because um, I can share a quick story that I've seen very bright kids coming from college to do their internships, and they're brilliant. They're so eager to do so many things and so prepared in some instances, things I didn't know when I left the college, or was not necessarily ready for it. But there are some other things that schools are not teaching our kids. They're spending 4 years of their life doing taking classes, and I can relate to that. I've been 2 years in grad school. There's things I'm never going to use. Um, Maybe doing some of these schools I've seen doing the requiring students to have a what do I call it? No, not apprenticeship, but
Internship or yeah.
built-in internship built into their 4 years or 4 years and a half. So you take a semester and go to actually do some of the work. And some things that, for example, never heard of is change management. We introduced them the idea of what change management is into the life cycle of an application support. And it's like, no, nobody told me, how do I move something to production or what are the steps to, you know, compliance is a foreign concept, you know. And it was in some ways for me too, because I was very concentrated in cybersecurity, so I was oblivious to some of these things, and it happens everywhere. If you're talking about IT in the IT life cycle, right? You're not only supporting an application, you might be moving to um, interacting more with the business, understanding requirements. Procurement is another one.
Yeah.
No, the kids don't know how to write or maybe they should how to write a requirements, how to evaluate vendors, how to look at pricing. If I were to grab somebody and say, okay, I need your help to gather requirements and to evaluate vendors, and what do I do? Uh, so there are great opportunities for kids to learn, but also they need to realize that the 4 years of school is not necessarily going to prepare them for the real life. They need to get out.
I
They need to be doing a side job or volunteering, if nothing else, and the local university and the local community, and
which is a great
hands
segue
on.
to a topic you're super passionate about, and that's volunteering, right? And
Yes,
I, a little background on that. I read that you were actually in a major earthquake at one point in time in your life, right?
I was. Yes, I was what 9 years old, I think. My hometown in the jungle of Peru got hit with a 7.3, 7.23. It was very, very, very big earthquake. A lot of people died because of the type of construction we had in that time in my hometown. And well, think about all the pipes getting, messed up, not good, reliable water. Back then, also, we got hit with a cholera outbreak throughout South America. So, earthquake, think about cholera, on the sanitary conditions. My family was living in the back of our house in a yard on a tent for like 9 months while rebuilding.
Wow.
I got sick with cholera, almost
Oh
died,
my.
and but I also saw people coming, people outside our community, international organizations, just neighbor helping neighbor, and that I took. I mean, I that was impacted in some ways my life because I was asking my mom like, where are these people coming from? Why are they doing this? Why did we have somebody from the U.S. coming and helping, to do something to help or rescue, and or maybe after, right? Many years later, coming and doing clinics, and 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 she said they do it because they feel, I mean, they're giving back. They feel that they are doing something for their fellow you know human beings. Because if you think about it, you know why would somebody leave their country and go somewhere where they don't know anything about it, and um, obviously more different situations, right? You don't drive yourself, so you don't cook your food, you don't know if the water is safe to drink, and come work and come volunteer your time. That was a concept that in my mind was not necessarily very popular. So I learned something there, and obviously throughout my life and some of the things that people have helped me out, I thought all throughout my life until now, especially coming to the US, where I believe there's part of the culture, and I've learned that as well. Volunteering in your local
Right.
community. I did that. I started volunteering at my local resource center. I was starting to teach GED in Spanish, completely outside IT. But I got to know people in my community. I was able to, and they got to know me. It led me to opportunities of employment, improve my English when I first came to the US. Um, so volunteering for me is a way to say thank you, because I've been blessed in many ways. I've been giving opportunities. The U.S. has been a country that has opened their arms for me, for for my family, um, and it is a way for me to say I'm here and I want to give back. I want to give back to somebody from the little knowledge I have. Maybe somebody can learn from it because I did throughout the mentorship I received so far. I've learned quite a few things, and people have been invested time and effort um, to show me the way. Maybe I can do some of that too. And it doesn't have to be in IT,
Right.
although I do some IT volunteering. It could be serving soup at your local kitchen or mission place. Um, it could be just being aware of where are opportunities to serve on a board or um, participate in activity in your community. Especially now as we're trying to get out of COVID, right? Getting back in interacting with our community, our fellow citizens, as you say.
What have been some of your favorite volunteering activities?
Um, well, I will have to rate it in some ways. The last one was through Team Rubicon. I was deployed to West Virginia to work on flood survey and recovery. That was great because it's been so long. The last one, perhaps it was a trip to Liberia, Africa, to install a computer lab for a local community college.
Wow.
I had some friends there that were helping with building agriculture to this war-torn country, and I got the opportunity to go and do something I know how to do, to reimage computers, to set them up in a network, to because they are learning how to use Microsoft Office and these old computers, and that was very rewarding because not only I was able to help, but also it's something that I was comfortable doing, which is networking and setting up computers.
Oh, that sounds very cool. I can't imagine the environment over there. I'm sure it's not at all similar to what we are fortunate to have here, but it's a skill that hopefully those people can put to use and can materially affect their life.
Yeah, and I guess my point to anybody who's listening doesn't have to be live in the country. It could be your local resource center that needs some help, you know, or it could be helping, I don't know, the elderly in our community to learn about not being um, victims of scams. Somebody shouldn't be remoting into your computer to ask you for a refund or the refund in your bank account.
Yeah.
Things like that. Um, Learning about phishing or being careful on things you put online or things you share online. Uh, could be as simple as that. It could be just digging a hole or framing a wall.
Basically, no man is an island, and if you give, you shall get, kind of a thing.
You should give with the expectation not to receive.
That's very apropos. That's correct. And I think these things all enrich the community and it enriches people, and it's a very noble act. So for all our listeners, I would say listen to Hans here, and if you have that opportunity, absolutely volunteer. And Hans, I know we're right at the hour here. Is there anything that you'd like to plug? Do you have any appearances, talks, books, anything that you would at all, any organizations that you would like to mention that we can put in the show notes that you would like to guide people to?
You didn't tell me. You didn't give me a fair warning. I don't know. I'm not writing a book right now. Like I told you before, I am a general. I mean, a normal guy, doing his job. Um, live in a small community. Um, I don't have. I'm not a famous person. I have been very. What's the word I want to use? Fortunate to grown a network of like-minded people, which I learned a lot. And also, when I had some time, I share some stuff in LinkedIn. Um, I have lots of interest in learning. I know that I'm still in this path of learning. I don't claim to be an expert on anything. I have some areas of concentration, I would call it. And then over the years of my experience has allowed me to have some, I guess let's put it this way, have some strong opinions about my experience and some things that I've seen that work. Um, but I'm still in this journey to learn, and I think that everybody should just not stop learning. Um, I, I guess that's pretty much it. Organizational life support. I mentioned Team Rubicon. Um, I think that's the last one I would like to mention at this point.
We'll put a link to them in the show notes. Uh, and we're at the time, but thank you so much, Hans. This has been wonderful. Really appreciate you taking an hour out of your time to be with us today. I'm sure it's inspiring and it's going to help some folks.
Thank you for inviting me, and I hope everybody finds a little bit of information that is helpful.
Fantastic. Take care.